Okay, well, this is probably take like 100 or something like that of me trying to make a YouTube video, but here I am, still trying. Um, I'd like to make a channel about literature. I love it. It's something that I think people should consider more often. Literature is something that has changed my life. I'm a different person because I read literature, and it's constantly changing me. There are other channels that talk about literature, and that's amazing. I'm thankful for it. But the reason why I want to make my own channel is to maybe breed more channels that are like the one that I'm kind of hoping to see, and to sort of juxtapose my own channel with a type of literature that I don't think a lot of people are actually talking about. That's mainly classical literature. I think most channels that I see today that talk about literature are more concerned with the aesthetic of the literature than the actual literature itself. So they're concerned with the cover of a book, and ironically enough, a lot of the things that they talk about in their literature are very surface level, right? So they might talk about how they think out of 5 stars, The Hunger Games is like a 4.2 stars or something like that. And I think that's great. I don't have anything against that. I'm glad that people are reading literature and talking about it. I wish that more people would do that. And so the fact that there even is a channel out there that talks about literature is amazing, and it's important to me. But at the same time, there is a wide variety of literature that has impacted the world for millennia that has almost completely gone ignored now in our modern society. It's kind of amazing to me that a book used to be a coveted thing. People couldn't just have them. They weren't published online. People didn't have excess amounts of paper. They'd have to, work for it. It would, for example, if you wanted a Bible at one point in time, you'd have to kill 200 oxen, 200 goats, 200 lambs in order to get enough skin to parch, which is what we call parchment, so we could actually write out on enough pieces of parchment the length of a Bible. And so you can imagine the process of, killing 200 lamb and then putting salt on their skin and shaving off all of their hair and bleeding them so that way there's no more blood on the paper, and bleaching it so that way it's whiter, and all of this kind of stuff to get a particular kind of paper just to write a couple of pages, and then doing that process 200 times, right, in order to get one Bible. And it wouldn't be something where you ordered your new ESV Bible online on Amazon and then within 2 days it comes, perfect. It would take months, sometimes years, to make a Bible, and that was just one book. So every book went through this process, which meant that when books were written for a very, very long time, they weren't written with the same attitude that we have today. Books were written with an attitude that what you are writing needs to count. And so most books that were written were actually copied, because very few books were really of that sort. Another thing that's kind of in the same line of that reasoning is that most ancient authors, you'll notice there aren't as many. And that's not only because there weren't as many people that were given that opportunity, which is really just not the case. Although for a while, reading and being educated was a rich person's sport, if you will. Academia is sort of an elitist endeavor, and I don't mean that in the connotative negative sense that it is elitist in the spirit of putting other people down, because that's actually something you learn when you're educated, that's not the point of an education, to be better than other people and to be prideful, but actually to learn humility, right? And education comes from the Latin educere, the prefix ex, out or out of, and ducere, to lead. So you're being led out, and what are you being led out of? You're being led out of yourself. And so to be an educated person is actually to learn to be selfless, to be humbled. So when I say it's an elitist endeavor, really what I mean is you had to be an educated elite. You had to be somebody who was worth investing in, because not everybody had the money to spend on this kind of thing. And so a person who was extremely smart was the kind of person that they were going to invest in. And that's not really a new concept. We think about this with sports, for example. The NBA is an extremely exclusive club. You don't just go to an NBA practice or a game and say, hey, I want to play basketball, and so you're going to let me play basketball. No, they say, well, are you one of the 500 best basketball players in the world right now? And if you aren't, then you don't get to play, right? Academia has been that way for a very long time. And so there's millennia of books. That there is years upon years upon years of this practice of extremely educated people, more than we could ever understand, who are saying things that are mind-boggling. They're amazing. And I'd love for people to bring that to social media. Now, I think that there are channels that do this. And I think that there are channels that are trying to do this. And what they've limited themselves to is a very select few amount of classics. Basically, books that are recognized by name, right? So Milton, Dante, Caesar, Homer, maybe Ovid, depends, but maybe Ovid. You might see like the Song of Roland or Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Probably going to get Frankenstein, Pride and Prejudice, things like that. And they're very specific books. Even in Jane Austen, for example, it's really rare to see people talk about Persuasion the same way how they talk about Pride and Prejudice. And so the kinds of classics that are talked about online are actually mostly talked about because of their popularity online, rather than the books that are mainly talked about or the most influential books. I mean, even Milton, for example, is an extremely young Puritan in the tradition that has come before him, right? The book Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained come at the end of the Renaissance, and some people think even past the Renaissance. So what about all the other people in the Renaissance? What about all the classics that came before him? They're just as important, and they're all things that inspired him to write his stuff. Another thing that we see online is a lot of times if somebody does take up the task of doing a close reading of someone like Milton, which again, I think is a fantastic thing. I think that people should be doing that. It's excellent to see that there are still people out there that can read. Because honestly, the first thing that Milton teaches us is that we can't read, right? I mean, he was extremely educated. But there are still people that can read Milton, and there are people that are doing close readings of Milton. But normally what happens is they do a close reading of one book of Milton, right? Or the other thing that they do is they say, well, I'll do this online course for Milton. And so it's just tragic because there are very few people that are really dedicating a channel to something that has a close reading of a book that goes through its entirety. And so I would like to start a channel that kind of does that. I have a couple of reasons why I'd like to do it, aside from just the fact that there's a market, if you will. The first reason is that there is a breadth and a depth to literature that is amazing, and something that people should hear, something that people should see and consider. And so Milton is great, but so is Spencer. Edmund Spencer is just as good. Milton calls him the serious and sage poet. And that's a pretty amazing title for someone like Milton to give to Spencer. And there's countless other names. There's even more recent historians that are doing some great work. I think like Ross King, for example, is a great historian. He's got some good stuff. I also think that he's not a historian, but I think that Umberto Eco writes some pretty great literature, right? But it's seldom talked about the way how something like Fourth Wing is talked about, or something like The Hunger Games is talked about. And I just believe that there is better literature out there. So I'd like to expose people to greater literature. The other thing that I see, and another reason why I'd like to, make a channel like this, is because I'm a Christian, and a lot of literature out there is Christian literature. A lot of literature out there is affected by Christian literature, and the most important literary book by far, just as a fact, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you want to admit it or not, the Bible is the most important book in the world. And it's not just because it's sold more than any other book. It's because every single book has to either accept it or deny it, and it has to interact with it to some extent. Some books that, we can argue were written before or after are still interacting with it. They're, for example, like the Epic of Gilgamesh. Right. Well, there wasn't a Bible for the Epic of Gilgamesh to respond to. Well, the Epic of Gilgamesh still has a deluge story, and so does the Bible. So it's still intertwined with the book. And I believe the reason for that is because God breathed through his word creation. And so the world has been created by God. And because of that, we have to interact with it. We have to interact with his word. And it's a blessing that we have. And if the Bible is a form of literature, then all other forms of literature are also going to have to interact with this as well. So I'd love to talk about literature, but from the perspective of a Christian, and not just someone who is talking about literature in its most recent form, right? So, there's LGBT theory and things of that nature that is extremely young, and honestly, from my opinion, is also garbage comparatively to everything else that's out there. That's a tradition that we've received, and recently we've just rejected for things that don't matter. And then lastly, I'd just like to kind of talk about the format that I'd like to kind of pose. So I'd like to do like a Monday through Saturday kind of daily post, and then do other miscellaneous posts as well. And I'd like to also have a close reading. So the close reading that I'd like to go through in its entirety is Spencer's Faerie Queene. I think that is just like the best book ever. Aside from the Bible, the Faerie Queene is amazing. Every single line is gold, and it's worth reading. And people don't even know that Spencer exists. And it is a tragedy, because it's, there is no other book like the Faerie Queene, and I would love to talk about it more, Currently, I'm a 5th and 6th grade teacher at Centurion Christian Classical School, and I'm really thankful for the opportunity to work there. But as a 5th and 6th grade teacher, the opportunity to teach higher level literature is just not in the cards right now. And so this is sort of an opportunity to do so. So on Mondays, I'd like to do a Milton Monday. And each one of these would be short forms. So on Monday, I would do his short form literature, whether that's like his sonnets or some of his prose works, or even some of his orations. He has this great work on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres, and it is so cool. I love it, and it's like 5 minutes or something like that, so totally worth reading. And it brings in all of these different allusions like Homer's golden chain, and I love it. On Tuesday, I'd like to do Tuscan Tuesdays, and really what I mean by that is like Florentines. I just like to introduce on Tuesdays different Florentines. I was kind of hoping that one of the routes this channel could take is being a sort of source in and of itself, where people could go to and go, okay, who's someone I've never heard of before? Because obviously there's literature that everyone's heard of. Everyone's heard of Dante's Divine Comedy. At the very least, everyone's heard of Dante's Inferno, which is the first part of Dante's Divine Comedy, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso. But regardless, there's the Inferno, and people have heard of that, but there's all this other literature that's connected to it, and that's the kind of stuff that people haven't heard of. And I would love to have a channel that on Tuesdays goes through Tuscan Tuesdays. If you are in Florence, right outside of Florence, there's those statues of some of the most influential genius minds that have ever influenced the world, and they have 28 statues, and some of them are mythological, although they're hard to tell, but most of them are real people, right, that changed the world. So there's Cosimo de' Medici and Lorenzo de' Medici and Machiavelli and Guicciardini and Raphael and Leonardo and Michelangelo, and really the list goes on. I think Leon Battista Alberti is there, and Brunelleschi might be there as well. So I'd like to talk about these guys. There are people out there that can do this way better than I can. Maybe I'll even put in some channel recommendations of, hey, this guy talks about this thing, and I mean, you have to check out his work, or something like that. And I'd like to just kind of have that open. On Wednesdays, I'd like to do William Wednesdays, which is William Shakespeare. If you love literature, you cannot avoid William Shakespeare. He is a seminal character. Everything he writes is good. He writes so many plays. I think he writes 154 sonnets. And so similarly to the way how I'm not really interested in the daily format of doing Milton's long form poetry, but mostly his sonnets and things of that nature. I'd like to do that with William Shakespeare's sonnets as well. I'd like to also do Thomas Thursdays. So St. Thomas, or his normal nickname is Doubting Thomas. I'd like to introduce literature or things in literature that provoke doubt from people but are actually meant to inspire faith. So like a deluge story is a great example of that, where we have the deluge and most people interpret it and go, okay, well, the Epic of Gilgamesh has the deluge and the Bible has the deluge, and so all religions are the same because they're all thinking about this same random episode that happened 100,000 years ago, or something like that. And I don't believe that. I think that in literature, when you compare it properly and when you compare it honestly, you find that it's the differences that make these different stories shine and stand out. So in the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example, the values in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the values in the Bible are completely different, right? The harlot and the trapper are they are characters in the Epic of Gilgamesh that are rewarded, and Kaidu comes out from that space of kind of being beastly, and he's actually turned human because he learns from the harlot and the trapper. And in the Bible, you get almost the exact opposite, where when, for example, okay, now I have to think of an example. Okay, so like Judah and Tamar, right? Judah is actually more beastly in his harlotry than he is human. And that's not to say that he loses his humanity. The Bible also disagrees with that too. You are born human and you stay human because that is the kind that you have been created in. But, Judah does not act like a man. He acts sinful, and so he acts more beastly because of his harlotry, which is essentially the opposite of the Epic of Gilgamesh's same story. So I'd like to do that. That would be Thomas Thursdays, if you will. On Friday, I'd like to talk about Ovid mostly, because Ovid was banished from the Roman Empire. So he wrote the Amores, which are basically these love poems on how to seduce women and get them to sleep with you. And the emperor, who is not exactly the most stand-up guy, is like, yeah, okay, Ovid, you gotta go. And so on Friday, I just like to call them Freaky Fridays, because Ovid was a freak, right? And those days I would mostly talk about Ovidian episodes. So I wouldn't talk about the Amores, but I would actually want to talk about the Metamorphoses, or things that are a little more, dark, freaky, right? So maybe like Edgar Allan Poe, or Frankenstein, or Dracula, darker stuff, gothic, but not in the art sense of the word. I'm not talking about, I'm not talking about art from, like, what is it? I think is it 10,000 to 1,400, something like that? Or no, sorry, it'd be 1,000 to 1,400 AD. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about just darker content in general. And then most people's favorite day of the week is Saturday. And so on Saturday, I'd like to talk about my favorite poet, who's Spenser. So I'd like to do Spenser Saturdays. I think that would be a great opportunity to talk about his short form stuff. For those people who do know Spenser, almost everybody who talks about Spenser is going to exclusively talk about the Faerie Queene, because it's his seminal work. It's the most gargantuan effort that he puts forth, and it is amazing. Some people will study the Amoretti because they think it's a part of the Faerie Queene. I don't know if I'm necessarily convinced of that, but it is vital to his work. So there's definitely good reason to study the Amoretti, but he has other poems as well. And I'd love to talk about them. I'd like to talk about the Amoretti, and I'd like to talk about things like the Visions of Petrarch, or like the Ruins of Time, I think is another one. And so part of this is me wanting to share this with people. Part of this is also me wanting to study this and then share what I find. So there's a lot to be had there. For example, on Tuscan Tuesdays, I'd love to share something from Vespasiano as I'm reading him myself, right? I think it's just something exciting that I think if people hear, they would want to be like as well. And if they don't, well, Lord willing, somebody hears. But regardless, I hope that the Lord blesses you, and have a great one. Have a great day.